So, I have plans of talking about how I came to write The Beekeeper's Apprentice this afternoon. This has been, let's see, 1987, so nearly 40 years. It's been a while, so it takes a number of notes for me um, to reconstruct my memories because I was a very different person then. And to illustrate that, I I was thinking that I should take some of these pages and pictures and scan them and put them either on a blog or a poster or something, because many of you are going to say, "What was that?" So I will probably do this. The picture I'm going to show up shows what I was then. I had a little bit of gray in my hair then, and my daughter with her funny scrunched up face, and my son and my husband, and if in the corner of the picture is sort of blotch that is a dog, our Irish Wolfhound, which I only mention because um, Irish Wolfhounds played a role in one of the books I wrote, and not a Russell, and will play a role in the next book. So watch for the Irish Wolfhound in Knave of Diamonds. But here's here's me, husband, daughter, son, and dog. It wasn't taken at the house. Um, but this was where I lived. It was a farmhouse in Watsonville. This was the picture I'm about to show you is taken a couple of years earlier when we had first bought the place, and it was very run down. So the people that you see in there are my mother who conquered the garden, and my sister who would come out and do various things. So that was the farmhouse. The white one was where my parents lived. The corner building there is where we put on a study when I had enough money to justify spending money on myself. We put a study on there, a two-story room, and that's where I worked. But that's where I was literally and figuratively in 1987. Um, I started writing the book when the kids went off to school in September. I started probably, these were the days when you actually went back to school in September, and not middle of October. I mean, at the middle of August. Um, but I sat down to write a story, and I wanted to write about Sherlock Holmes because I was interested in how that mind worked. Any of you who have heard me talk about The Beekeeper's Apprentice will have heard me say that the Granada television series was playing, so Jeremy Brett was in my head, and I thought it would be interesting to look at what that person looked like if he had an actual partner who could challenge him. And so that's where Russell came from. It's a coming of age story of a young woman with an extraordinary mind and how she meets and befriends and partners and eventually marries, though not in this book, Sherlock Holmes. So the year before, I had been to England. We lived in California most of the time, but my husband was born and raised in India and had moved to England just after the end of World War II. Took his degree there and did a PhD in Nottingham, but his family was based in Oxford while they were in England. So when I married him, I sort of inherited a house, and we would go there quite often. Um, the year before, 86, we had spent a couple of months in England, in Oxford. And I had happened into a shop on the high street down near Magdalen College and the botanical gardens that sold pens. I had thought of it was the pen shop, but I actually looked up before this. I looked up to see if it was still there, and it is still there, but it's called Pens Plus. So if you're ever in Oxford, stop in at Pens Plus and buy yourself a pen because What I bought was a Waterman fountain pen, a very ordinary looking pen. It's a very solid tool um, that I would use. It's very stiff because it's quite old. Um, that I would use for the next few books. And I sat down and I picked up my Waterman fountain pen and I started writing, not really having any idea what I was doing. I had played with the idea of a book before. I'd written a sort of futuristic novel about the first quarter of it or third of it a number of years before, and had no idea how to finish it, so I put it aside because who knew? Kids take up a lot of time. so I I hadn't finished a book. I hadn't plotted out a book. I hadn't any idea what I was doing. But I thought one thing I do know how to do is write a sentence in English. So maybe I could, make, if not a living off of it, I could sort of supplement Noel's salary. So I sat down when the kids had gone off to school in September, and I wrote. And it's kind of interesting because looking back at my writing, for one thing, it's legible, which I find astonishing. But I also I found that the book changed in some interesting ways. And I obviously am not going to go into the huge details of all of that. So what I thought I'd do is just that first sentence, because most people who are familiar with The Beekeeper's Apprentice remember that sentence. The sentence is now, I was 15 when I first met Sherlock Holmes, 15 years old with my nose in a book as I walked the Sussex Downs and nearly stepped on him. Well, I had been to Sussex. I knew just sort of like this much about Sherlock Holmes, but everybody knows something about Sherlock Holmes. And I was just playing with the idea of maybe how to write a story. So I wrote the first draft. And I should mention that all of this stuff that I'm showing you, most of this stuff I'm showing you, is in two file boxes that are in the process of going off to the the University of Minneapolis has a big Sherlock Holmes collection, and it turned out that they were actually interested in having my papers, which they they rather grandly called the archives. So the Russell archives. So I have sent them, probably 20, 25 file boxes so far. But I'm working my way sort of back to The Beekeeper's Apprentice because I wanted to go through it. And this is, as you probably know, the 30th anniversary year of The Beekeeper's Apprentice. And so I wanted to hang on to this particular box. In fact, there's two boxes because there's so much rubbish attached to it. I wanted to hang on to these boxes sort of until the very end because I wanted to go through them before I sent them off into the wilds and let people paw over them. So if anyone's looking for a PhD thesis topic, there you go. The fiction of Laurie R. King. 50 years from now, nobody will know who I am, but I have archives. Anyway, I was interested when I started going through these papers to find that that first line had changed, and I remembered it as being. I'll show it to you there. It's just that's what my papers look like. It's sort of off. It's not really yellow. It's a sort of tan color of those plain lined paper. And my first draft was, I first met Sherlock Holmes when I was 15. I was walking the downs, and then I put in Sussex, one sunny afternoon in May, with a book in front of my nose, and I nearly stepped on him. Now, it's an interesting way that it changes, because I think that what I was looking for was a certain rhythm. But because I didn't know what I was doing, I didn't know that's what I wanted. The second draft, which I must have done early on, because I gave this stuff to a friend of mine named Gretchen Tom. Gretchen had been my La Leche League leader when I was a breastfeeding mother, and had been my advisor when I became a La Leche League leader myself. So she was an old friend, and she also was, among other things, a secretary and typist. I've always been just a crap typist. I I hated typing when it was on a electric machine. I never had to learn really on a manual machine, but my early machines were electric, and I just made so many mistakes that I hated doing it. So I actually paid her to do it, which in those days, this was a hobby. This was Lori's hobby. Um, to to justify paying her whatever it was I paid to do these typing was a kind of big deal. It was a real luxury for me. But I can tell that I made some of the changes very early, because it's sort of interleaved with the other, where I've crossed out, as you may have seen, I've crossed out that first line on my first draft and put this in front of it, that has a new chapter one and a new first line, and then an arrow saying going to page one, which is numbered up in the corner. So that page one, chapter one, settled down to, I was 15 when I met Sherlock Holmes, comma, 15 years old with my nose in a book as I walked the Sussex Downs and nearly stepped on him. Very close to what we have now. So that actual first draft that I gave to Gretchen to type is only one word different. I was 15 when I met Sherlock Holmes. And I think that's a really interesting choice, that the awareness of the first line and the rhythm of that first line comes into my life slowly and yet very firmly. So by the time I had it typed up and was sending it out, it was still without that first in there. But very soon it had taken on. I was 15 when I first met Sherlock Holmes. 15 years old with my nose in a book as I walked the Sussex Downs and nearly stepped on him. And I think it's so important to have a first line that means something to the author, and that hits the ear correctly, even though in those days nobody did audiobooks. So that's where I was. I started out with I wrote the book. I then I then wanted to know where these characters were going, and I dutifully sent out the manuscript to various publishing houses, um, and they dutifully sent it back with their little Xerox notes saying this doesn't meet our needs at this time. But while I was waiting for somebody to nibble on my hook, I had printed out copies of this and given it to various friends to read and to remark on, and my husband, who was not a novel reader, he didn't read fiction at all, but he dutifully went through it. So that first draft, which has I was 15 when I met Sherlock Holmes. This is what the first page looks like, and this is kind of an archaic method of publishing now, because people don't No, nobody sends out anything like this now. But at the time, this is what a submission looked like. You had the first page, the title, by, and then the contact information, and the 90,000 words up in the corner, which is, I don't know if that's right or not, but can you see the first, I can't really see, there we go. That was the first title of it. The Segregation of the Queen. Now, this is not a test, but some of you may remember that in the last set, wasn't the final written, but the final setting of Sherlock Holmes stories. Sherlock Holmes has a book that he is pretending as a code book, and it turns out to be a book that he's written on beekeeping, because Conan Doyle has him go off to the Sussex Downs to keep bees when he retires. And so he startles the German spy by having this book on beekeeping, which he then talks to Watson about, and says that this is the result of his longtime interest in beekeeping. And it's about the art of beekeeping, the subtitle of which is with some notes on the segregation of the queen. So that was my first title, The Segregation of the Queen, because I liked the feminine aspect of it. I liked the sort of tantalizing, what does this mean? I also liked it because the story has her being segregated from him in the course of the story. And a chess game enters into it as well, so you get to play with that. So that was the title of it. And I sent it around. This is one of the copies of it that I actually had printed up while we were in England. And so I printed it up, had it bound, and that people have made notes on it, and I stuck notes into it. So this was my sort of first editorial draft. Things like, the fact that I spelled recognize with a Z instead of an S. And of course, being a typewriter, you underscore instead of italicize. Lots and lots of notes in it. That is, my working copy, which is falling apart in all directions. And when we got back from England, when we were in England, I started writing around to various agencies, because I thought, I can't be both trying to write a book and taking care of a family, and trying to be businesslike about sending this thing out. And I had already written to 4 or 5 publishers. They all sent it back, and I thought, I really need a partner in this enterprise. So instead of having this is what you used to get stuck in with your manuscript when they mailed it back to you. This particular one is from Houghton Mifflin. Thank you for the opportunity to consider your work. We are sorry to report we do not believe we could publish it successfully for you. Very nice of them, but I got a number of things like that. So I had my mother go and look. She was living here in California and working in the library. I had her go and make note of agents and editors' guides, and that's her scruffy handwriting. And on, you notice the dot matrix scratch paper that she's used from the library. we're talking old school here. So I made note of several agencies, and because I live in California, because I had not ever really been to New York, I didn't really believe in New York, and thought, sure, there's not going to be any publisher you know, any agent out there who would, you know, be interested when they have all the New York writers out there. So what I did was make note of the agencies in the San Francisco area. And so there's my four that I was down to. Linda Allen, and it's specified in the back of Agents and Editors what she wants. She wants about 50 pages of each, and I had a note here saying, nice woman. So I talked to her on the phone. The note of when I sent it, Frederick Hill Associates, Michael Larson, Elizabeth Pomada, and literary marketing consultants. And I got letters back from them, and one of them said they liked Grave Talent, but not, that was the other book that I had written at the time. That gave Grave Talent, but not Beekeeper's Apprentice. And then the second one said they like Beekeeper's Apprentice, but not Grave Talent. And the third one said, we're happy to read this if you pay us $350, which I knew that was a bad idea. And Linda Allen wrote and said, I think they need work. If you're interested, I would be happy to represent you. And that was the beginning of a long relationship that only ended, you know, in the early teens. She finally retired. And I mean, it was a lovely partnership, a lovely relationship. And she managed to sell the book. I have, and again, all of this rubbish, all of these valuable records are going into the archives. And I have notes from Linda saying that she would be, you know, proud to represent me. And I have my first notes from Ruth Cavan, who bought them from St. Martin's Press. And Ruth was a beloved woman in the publishing world. She was older when she got started. She was in her 90s when she was still publishing when she finally died. It was a privilege to work with her because her eye was so good. You know, and so full of enthusiasm and intelligence. I mean, to have a good editor is a rare thing. So I would get these letters from her saying, Dear Laurie, as Linda must have told you, I've read Segregation of the Queen and I liked it and the whole idea of Mary Russell Sherlock Holmes very much indeed. I also see a lot of promise in the other books, which Linda has listed in a letter to me. We're going to have to buck the whole, oh no, not another Sherlock Holmes spin-off reaction. But I think the idea of Mary is unique enough that once we get the word around, we'll be able to. So, and at that point, she starts talking about actual editorial remarks. This is her first letter to me. I don't much like the title. I think it should be a bit more descriptive and something that suggests the basic theme. And goes on from there. So, I mean, it was a revelation to have these people take me seriously, and that's where we went. So that my initial letters from Linda start with her saying, I would love to represent you, but I have some problems with those two manuscripts. A Grave Talent seems to shift in the middle. The segregation is in many parts wonderful. Mary Russell is one of those wonderful parts. But again, to have actual editorial feedback on something that you had lived with all by yourself, because who do you give your work to for an honest judgment, right? You give it to your mother who says, oh, sweetie, you've written a book. It's great. And you give it to your husband who says, nice. Do you imagine you're actually going to make any money off of this? So to have somebody say, yes, I can do something with this, was as I said, a revelation, and it changed my life. I would write her these long letters, which I have here, some of which I actually had faxed her from England, so I can't remember where I was at the time, but to have this actual was, there we go. And they gave me $4,000, which, who knew? And that was the beginning of my relationships with both Linda and with Ruth. Ruth's typical letters would be, "Dear Lori, thanks for your letter. I'm glad that you're glad. Also that we're doing the book, of course. Dear Lori, I love the Beekeeper's Apprentice." And so forth and so on. So that sort of got me into the whole, little toe in the publishing world. I started getting an idea of how the business actually runs. I got an advanced reading copy. They printed up an actual, paper version of the thing and sent it out to various reviewers. I got the first reviews, which were not bad. They put it in their catalog, which I should have looked this up. But anyway, it goes their catalog, which I actually hung on to. You hang on to things because you think, surely I must need this, right? And then the book itself, which came. The book was published in February, so I would have got this, sort of the end of January. Yeah. I have a note saying, received by author 17 January 1994. And there it is. I was 15 when I first met Sherlock Holmes. 15 years old with my nose in a book as I walked the Sussex Downs and nearly stepped on him. So that's where it all began. And when I look at the notes and things that go with it, it reminds me that I had. People sometimes say, "So how many drafts are there in a book?" And all you can say is, it kind of depends on what you mean by a draft. I mean, in this case, I had written the original book in 1987. I then wrote what turned out to be the third one, but it gave me an idea of what I was writing towards. So it became a letter of Mary. But because I wanted to know what that partnership, the Holmes-Russell partnership, looked like eventually. When you had stepped in front of all those decisions about what is our partnership going to be, are we getting together? Are we not getting together? Are we marrying? Are we not? I wanted to just set it in my mind so that I knew what they were going to be when they were a partnership. And so when I had written the third one, I then could go back and write the one in the middle. So that's the kind of weird rhythm of writing that I did then, and I still do to some extent. I often will write a section in a book and just leave out a chapter that I'm not sure how to structure it and what needs to take place in what order, so I'll just make some notes and skip on. But in this case, I skipped over a whole book, knowing that I was skipping over a book. So my early letters to Linda and to Ruth have it very clear that I am writing, a series, and I am writing about these three stories that are all related and come together. So let's see, I was just trying to see if I could find. So I had The following list describes those works in the Mary Russell Sherlock Holmes series that are either completed or exist in outline form. Outline form. I didn't do outlines ever. Segregation of the Queen, 1915 to 1919. Mary Russell meets the retired Sherlock Holmes, becomes his student, his partner, his friend. 2. Title, question mark, 1918. Proposed. Mary Russell and Sherlock Holmes during their absence from England in 1918 to 1919, as described briefly in Segregation of the Queen in Palestine. So the second one I didn't actually publish until a number of years later, and that one was then called Oh, Jerusalem. The third one was supposed to be 1919 to 1920, set in France, which is recovering from the ravages of the First World War, in which we meet Holmes's son. Any of you who know the series finding some things that were already gone off here? Number 4, A Monstrous Regiment of Women, completed, to be revised. London in the post-war years, Mary Russell becomes involved with a charismatic woman religious and her feminist community, and, on the other hand, with Sherlock Holmes as something other than merely friend and mentor. And 5, A Letter of Mary, 1923, completed. Russell and Holmes, now a married couple, are drawn into the murder of Dorothy Ruskin, a woman archaeologist, and so forth. So there's these 2 books in the middle that that sort of went astray. One of them was published later as Oh, Jerusalem. And I think that, as I remember my conversations with Ruth, she decided that she wanted to move that down so that the next book would take place in England, and that would really establish the Russell Holmes series as being British. And because I had some flexibility on my writing time, I had another book, and I had the Kate Martinelli series too, that I had 2 books coming along in that. I could fit in another book, and I could put aside the ones that I had already written. I didn't have to publish those because I had no time to write. So, Oh, Jerusalem got moved on, and after the war, it was connected with the book that came with it, which was again set in England, called Justice Hall. So that made sense to shift that. But book number 3, Proposed, title question mark 1919 to 20, which was set in a France recovering from the ravages of the First World War, in which we meet Holmes's son. That one just kind of never came into being. So I'm really sorry about that. But the cover letter that these things is kind of interesting. When I write about who I am, what my background is, what I write about, the first novel is concerned with the life of a young girl in the years 1915 to 19. She's brilliant, troubled, of course, and alone until she comes under the tutelage of an equally brilliant, solitary, retired relic of the Victorian age whose name happens to be Sherlock Holmes. Yes, I know that the shelves groan with Sherlock Holmes novels. This is not a Sherlock Holmes novel. It is a Mary Russell novel. And then in parenthesis, is it rushing things to mention that I see Russell and Holmes in a series of books? I would dearly love to do 10 or 20 of the things. So, I am currently working on number 19. We're at the final stages of the edit. So, yes. So dreams do come true, Virginia. But I think that, I mean, it's really interesting to look at something like a book like The Beekeeper's Apprentice that had a long process. And you can see me thinking about it as I go. This is the basic story. That basic handwritten story is like 280 pages. It's a very short novel. Really, I mean, how many would that be in words? Maybe 50 to 60,000, something like that. Which even for a cozy, a traditional novel, is kind of short. But as I worked with Ruth, as I did a lot of reading on how to write, because I didn't know how to write, I had never taken a class in how to write. And I worked on it's various that my top row up there has the books on how to write mysteries. One of which was the Mystery Writers of America Journal, handbook on how to write mysteries, which I found tremendously helpful. And as I went through and I would rework The Beekeeper's Apprentice, The Segregation of the Queen, I realized that one of the problems with it was that it wasn't a novel as much as it was a sort of series of short stories that were put together. So one of the things that I did in the process of the various rewrites, before I had a publisher to tell me what to do, and an editor who took me seriously, I started making a novel out of it with an arc over this. You've got the story arc that starts here and ends there, and it ties everything together. And that's when I started making a novel out of it, so that all of the bits and pieces of my notes, my interleaved things, my questions to myself of what kind of car, and to clear up the dates and redo the contents page, and chapter 6 pontificating, um, you know um, all of those are me striving to teach myself how to be a writer, and how to, I mean, it's always a fine line between taking your work seriously and taking yourself seriously. I, you know, I, I never, as you probably can tell, I never take myself too seriously, but I do try and treat my work as being actual work. Um, Ideally, at some point, somebody's going to pay actual money for the thing, and it behooves me to make it as solid a piece of work as I can. So, I think that's one of the strengths of the traditional publishing system, is that you have an agent and an editor and a lot of different sections within a publishing house to to bring you to a state of reality of, if you are expecting to make a living off of this, you might want to take their judgment, um, you know, very thoughtfully. It's a problem now because when a book is rejected a number of times, which obviously I was, it's easy to say, well, I think I'll just self publish this. And some self published books are fabulous. I mean, some don't find homes in traditional publishing because they're different. And different isn't always bad. But um, some, and we've all, read self published novels that are just not very good and that really need a heavy kick from a serious editor to make the thing work as a story. And I was fortunate enough that I had that. I didn't have the option of self-publishing because in those days, self-publishing meant a vanity press who would publish you as many paperbacks as you wanted to buy from them, and you could then sell them out of your car and give them to your friends and the rest of it. And that was the only option. So, but over a period of time from 1987, when I wrote the first draft, until 1993, when we signed the contract with St. Martin's Press. When did I say that was? 29th of January 1993. I could I could teach myself a lot of how to write. So that's kind of how the Beekeeper's Apprentice started. It's been in 20, 25 different languages all over the world. We're talking 30 years now, as I said. It's now had this classic cover of it in the U.S. for a number of years, and it has different covers elsewhere in the world. It's everything from Turkish to Japanese to I think there's a Russian edition somewhere. And people keep falling in love with Mary Russell, which is just a lovely thing to have happen. Now, I am happy to open this up to questions. Sometimes when I do these events, I have somebody who is sending me texts of the questions that have come. I've seen the comments that have been coming. I'm not going to go back and make you sit and look at me reading the things. So I will say, if any of you have had questions that you've posted, or if you have a question now that you think of, if you post it now, so if you post a question now, I will see it in the comments, and I will address myself to those questions. Um, so and so I anyway. So any of you, I'm sorry to you. I'm sure you that instantly, as soon as I asked for questions, all of the questions that you thought of have gone straight out of your mind, which I'm sorry about that. But, and if you don't have any, that's fine. But if you have any things that you would like me to talk about, in particular, if you post it now, I will see it. So, um, I should also mention that we have various giveaways still going on. I'm doing a weekly giveaway here on Facebook, um, and a weekly giveaway on the Instagram feed, and a monthly, more or less, giveaway on the on the through the newsletter. So if you are a newsletter subscriber, look at the old newsletters. The last one that I think we put up for that one was an actual hardback copy. This lovely, not this particular one, but this copy of that edition of the book is going to be out. Um, and I think that there's various swag that's going up there this week. I can't remember what's going on next week. So, but if if you're interested in free stuff and fun things, keep an eye on there. So, okay. So, Carolyn, how did you work with Jenny Sterling to craft Mary's voice? Jenny did that. Jenny was so beloved for the Mary Russell books. It's She died very suddenly last December, and it's been very sad because she had Russell. I think she didn't always have the other accents going, but you can't do everything. Um, but I thought that her slightly supercilious, um, as Russell says, overeducated voice, I thought worked quite well. English, but not terribly. Um, and I thought she did that very well. There were a couple of the books that had a lot of foreign stuff and foreign phrases in it. I would work with her on, so that she could try and approximate the pronunciation somewhere. So, but she was lovely. Rose and Fern Publishing. Am I a beekeeper? No. Some of my best friends are beekeepers. No, I never kept bees when we lived in an area that was friendly to bees. Partly because I traveled a lot, and my husband and I used to go to England regularly in the summer times or other parts of the world. And it's really tough to keep bees if you're not around. You have to have somebody come and, I mean, even Holmes has a friend who comes in and cares for his bees when he's missing. Now I live in a place that doesn't have a lot of flowering plants. I'm surrounded by, oaks and redwoods and that kind of thing. And it's just not, bees would survive, but they wouldn't really thrive here. So I don't keep bees, no. Do I plant plot elements that you develop in later books, such as the accident that killed Mary's family? Yes and no. Sometimes I will plant things. In one of the books, they're driving home to Sussex, and she mentions that they had been in Japan. And because I knew that I wanted to set a book in Japan, and I knew it had to take place in between the last book, which was India, and this book. So I needed to, I needed to sort of fit it in there. Um, I made mention of Japan a couple of times because I wanted to force myself to go there. Um, and sometimes I will have an idea in mind that I will stick in there and hope that I can develop it. The accident that killed Mary's family, that is a theme that runs through the books, and in fact, in the one that I'm working on now, the Knave of Diamonds, the accident is mentioned two or three times because the main character in the book is her uncle Jake, who who wrote to her when she was in the hospital after the accident. And it talks a little bit in the book about how he felt guilty that he hadn't been able to make it to California to care for her after the accident. It's part of what's going on in the current book, so there's no point in talking about it now. But yeah, it's one of those things that I needed to. I needed her to be alone. You know, we novelists are cruel, but I needed Russell to be solitary, and I needed her to have lost her family, because how else would you explain a 15-year-old girl who's wandering around all on her own? Um, and so I had to get rid of her family. So I'm really sorry to inflict that on the family and on Russell, but that's, she needed to be a solitary person as she walked the Sussex Downs. And so that's obviously something that is so basic to her personality that you can't help but return to that time and again. So, but um, anyway, it's there's a number of things that I have indeed planted, thinking that I might go to them. Um, the Damien Adler thing, for example, she is aware of his son early. We don't really meet him until a much later book because basically we don't need to. It isn't until there's a story that involves him, The Language of Bees and God of the Hive, um, that the stories involve him, so we have to know uh, how they met, how she met him, how Holmes came to have a son, and all the rest of it. Those you find out later because, as I said, you don't need to know them until later. I didn't need to know them until later. It always astonishes me when people say that they have developed a whole biography of their characters, because I never know. I mean, how do I know what my person does until I need them to do something, and then to see if it fits with what I know about their personality? So some people are much more organized writers than I am. What can I say? I'm not an outliner. So, do I still write my current hand by hand? No, I don't. I don't handwrite anymore. I think that probably the first, I don't know, the first 8 or 10 books were probably written by hand, and all of them in fountain pen because, I mean, it's kind of silly to talk about pens, but that's the tool. And I found that using a ballpoint pen is work. It's work to put it to drag it over the page. And my writing life was such that if I had all day to write, I would write all day. There, I would write. The kids were at school, I was writing. Um, the kids had something after school, I was writing. So at the end of the day, if you've been writing for 8 or 10 hours, you can't move. Your hand would cramp. A fountain pen doesn't do that. A fountain pen, you don't have to push it. A good fountain pen just fills in the ink on its own. So I found that, to begin with, I wrote with pens, and I would often buy a new pen if I was going to start a new book. That was fun, and I experimented with some. I think my favorite pen that I used was a Namiki. It's a Japanese pen. I really liked it, and I think it was. I can't remember if it was the medium or fine nib, but anyway, I really liked the way it fit my hand. This pen here, this Waterman, is probably slightly too small for my hand. I have big hands, and the I it felt comfortable at the time, but it probably should have been a slightly larger one. Anyway, um, but it wasn't until laptops actually got the size that you could put them on your lap that I started translating that motion of, from being what I would do. I'll show you. This is doesn't look like a 50-year-old board, but it is. This is the clipboard that I sit. In fact, I still do. I sit with it on my lap, and I would write on my pad. Um, and when I first got the first laptop, and it was before Macintosh made actual laptop size. I mean, my daughter had a laptop, and it was Macintosh, but it wasn't for laps. My first one was a Sony Vaio, and it was small enough that I could sit with it on my lap. And somehow being able to sit with it on my lap allowed me to my brain to interpret that as being writing rather than typing. So starting probably the early thousands, I started writing on an actual laptop, composing rather than transferring stuff onto there that I'd already written. So yep. Um, and of course now you can't read my handwriting. So Carlina, hi. Can you see yourself doing more than 20 books? How long do you see Holmes and Russell taking up space in your mind? Well, I mean, I sort of have plans for. I'm working on the 19th, as I said. It'll be out in June, and it's called Knave of Diamonds. And I the that's for 2025. 2026 will be a second in the Raquel Lang series. But I'll then go back and do another Russell and Holmes in 2027. So number 20 will be 2027. I don't really know yet what I'm going to do. Probably Mycroft will be in there somewhere because it's time. But I I can't. I mean, it sort of depends on how long my energies hold out. But I can't see any reason to stop the books. I think that one of the advantages of writing a series that isn't always in one place and always about the same people is that I've been free to do all kinds of things with them that don't leave me feeling that I've had enough. Um, so, whether I'll keep writing, another, I doubt I'll write another 20 books because I'm already 72, but, Margaret, hi. Were the later books easier to write if there was one ahead of time in the timeline so you knew what happened before and after a case? Um, I think it might feel like making a border on a puzzle and then filling in the middle. Um, I, no, I don't tend to. I didn't. That was a sort of individual case because I needed to see where they were standing after that. You know, it, After Beekeeper's Apprentice, I needed to write the permanent relationship before I knew what the middle relationship would look like. And of course, Monstrous Regimen is all about her making decisions. And when she's made those decisions, they can then go on from there. So few of the books now are written with the next one in mind. Now, obviously, the two books that I mentioned earlier that go together, The Language of Bees and God of the Hive, those ones I kind of had an idea of what was going on in there because they were tied closely together. And when O Jerusalem was published, and as I said, I wrote it beforehand, but when it was published, we chose that publishing time because I knew I was going to write Ali and Mahmoud in England after that. So yeah, those links definitely exist. But um, I think that I always have a vague idea of what I'm doing with the next one, but it's never firm enough that I'm actually writing it. So, um, Leah, Mary and Holmes's relationship reads so real. How much of their dynamic comes from relationships in your real life? Was it completely from your imagination, or is there an underlying frame to them? Well, I, I am really not Mary Russell. She's far brighter and cleverer and more capable than I am when it comes to all sorts of things. I think that the fact that we both wear glasses, are interested in theology, and have hair on our heads is about that's about as far as it goes. Um, One of the things that did, however, contribute to my being able to write the Holmes Russell relationship was that my own husband, as you can see from the picture, was a lot older than I was. He was born in 1922 in India, and so he was not only a different generation, but a completely different background. And in fact, the background became much more of a barrier to communication than our ages. I mean, I didn't really think about his age much, but the fact that he'd been born and raised in India was something that entered our lives daily, attitudes and assumptions and all the rest of it. So, I think that's part of what goes on in that relationship. I because I knew what that looked like from the inside. Um, is there a specific reason why Mary can't have children? It's mostly because I don't think I could deal with it. I mean, if I can't even manage to write a book with poor old Dr. Watson as a main character, what am I going to do if I give Russell and Holmes a kid? You know, I Elizabeth Elizabeth Peters did it brilliantly with the Amelia Peabody stories, and I think if I were to write a story with their child, they'd just be retelling the Amelia Peabody stories. So why do that? However, I do manage to do similar things with little Estelle. So I get to play with Estelle and bounce her off of her rather often unsuspecting grandfather. So that gets me around it. So we've got a still, so we don't need to have a kid. How many books in the series do you have ideas for? I I never have ideas for more than a couple because I can't think that far in advance. So one or two. How true to Doyle's Holmes do you want to be or feel I have to be? My Holmes is allowed to be very different from the Holmes of Dr. Watson's partnership and Conan Doyle's writing. The Great War turned everyone upside down in England. Retirement changed him. Partnership with Russell changed him vastly. I've allowed him to develop in ways that Conan Doyle couldn't envision. But what I do try is to make sure that it feels like a progression that is natural and plausible. Um, I don't think that someone like Sherlock Holmes would remain the same. So um, that's I I have no problems with him being different. So I think I'll take maybe two or three more questions here because it's already 2 o'clock. So uh, Alexandra, if you could have Russell and Holmes travel to anywhere in the world, where would you go next? Well, they're off to Ireland next, which is fun. And as I said, I get to have an Irish wolfhound in there, and some of the people that I get to meet in Ireland are, You always find the most extraordinary people when you start doing research and you think, really? There was such a person? So you'll like the man that they meet. So um and similarly, where Barbara and I are traveling to next, I don't know. I haven't talked to Barbara recently about where we're going. Um, how much of my life finds its way into my books? Well, travel, yeah. I've traveled a lot, and I think that I don't I don't think I've written any major portion of any book where I haven't been there. I think the only parts of a book that I haven't been to were the Vietnam sections in Darker Place, Night Watch, Darker Place. Sorry, can't remember the names of the books. Um, and but I kind of have to. I kind of have to go someplace to feel that I can write about it. So sometimes it's been a while. I mean, the Paris sections of the book, I hadn't been to Paris in a while, and it's been a number of years since I've been to Ireland, but I have been there. So um, Robin says she's glad I kept Knave of Diamonds as the name of the new book. Yeah, it was. We had a long discussion over over titles, and that was an early one, and then they decided they wanted Diamond Deceiver instead, which Diamond Deceiver just didn't work. So we're back to Knave of Diamonds. So, and yes, I do know this was an Ethel M. Dell novel in 1939, I think it was. Anyway, so it's not the same one. How much research is required to include historical people, Picasso, or characters such as Kim O'Hara? Um, I do a fair amount of research. I tend to do, I tend to sort of go in depth for certain people, and biographies or letters or journals, that kind of thing is what I really. Journals and diaries and letters are ideal because they're personal and they're at the time rather than looking back. So yeah, I mean the tougher part is to find somebody. If I have my characters going someplace in a certain year that I don't know anything about, to look around and see who was there and what I can find out about them. Of course, the advantage is if there's not much about them, I can just lie. um, let's see. Fountain pens are not friendly to left-handers. Yeah, I think Russell has found that too. Um, Mycroft Holmes is good. Yes, yay for the return of Raquel Lang. Sabina asks, why did I create Mary as a young American English girl and a Jew? She's an outsider in so many ways when you first meet her. Um, she's an orphan. She's in a country that is not basically her own. I mean, she loves that area. She spent childhoods there, but she is not English. Um, she is, too young to be an adult, but she is definitely an adult mind. And the role of Jewish people in England is similarly outside, because it's always been, even now, is strongly a country that basically assumes everybody is a Christian and a Protestant Christian at that. Um, that it's, over the last century, they've come a long way. But still, the attitudes towards Jews were that, oh, yes, there are those people. And so she has to be in all kinds of ways and outside. It also it also gave her an area that she and I could share academic backgrounds, because that's I studied Old Testament. So okay, let's do one more. Leah asks, Lantern's Dance is great, not at all a story I foresaw. When did it become the idea? And was I writing others in the series when it was formed? Um, I mean, The Lantern's Dance is my Holmes book. It looks at Holmes's background in a way that Locked Rooms did for Russell, and to some extent the Knave of Diamonds will for Russell. You know, looking at her background and the things that she saw and she missed, and she regrets and she didn't see, and um, and so you know the fact that she figures out in Lantern's Dance, she figures out a lot of what Holmes's background is and where he came from. Um, was very satisfying to write. It sort of started as some discussions that I had with a production company in England who was thinking of doing an English beekeeper, and they wanted to figure out a way of because you know, most of the characters are white. They wanted to see if they could figure out a way of meeting the diversity quotients of a British production, and so we started talking. And I said, "Well, no reason, you know, Russell's fairly clear on what her background is, but there's no reason that Holmes can't be a mixture of various things." And so that's kind of where it came from. What I ended up with is extremely different from theirs. But you know, Holmes could be any number of things. It's not an idea that no one else in the Holmesian world has come up with. By the way, there's other people who've written about Holmes's background. So anyway, well, I think that we've kind of we've covered Beekeeper from pen to paperback. You like that alliteration? Um, I think, as I said, I will do scans of some of these things and put them together. If I do that, I'll mention it in the newsletter. So if you get my newsletter, I will mention what I've done and where, because I wanted to do some of that before I send this off to my friends in Minnesota. Um, and I just wanted to thank you all for coming, for visiting. I will leave this, I'm hoping that it's recording it, and I will leave this on for anyone who wants to come back and see it. And I will probably put it onto YouTube. So thank you very much. I hope you continue to enjoy Mary Russell. I hope you like the Knave of Diamonds when you get to meet, um, catch up with Jake Russell next year. And I thank you very much for coming by. I hope I haven't kept you up too late or kept you from dinner or started your day too early. Thank you. Bye bye.